Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, December 5th, 2017, and I don't know, got a weird feeling about today, and I feel like going back to bed. Anybody want to come on and do the show? Yes? No? Okay. Well, perhaps not. Lots going on, lots to catch up on, and I don't think the president has been rage tweeting this morning, or any other kind of tweeting for that matter. He's been, I think, silent since yesterday, since telling everybody that Alan Dershowitz was a must-watch for whatever reason. And maybe that gives us an opportunity to catch up on a few interesting stories from the last couple of days, get our bearings on where we are on Trump-Russia investigation and ancillary topics. I have a request here from Scott Anderson for some coverage of a story I haven't really paid a great deal of attention to. I had hoped not to have to, but I guess they're keeping it alive in the media here, so we'll perhaps check in on these things. And others, feel free, of course, to give me a tweet at KagroX or use the KITM Kagro in the Morning hashtag to have your comments stay up a little bit longer on my tweet deck, and then we can work you into the conversation as well. Let's see, so very many things going on this morning. Bill in Portland, Maine kicks us off with a morning tweet. Daily Coast Radio is live now. You can tell by the fact that you're listening to it, of course. KagroX, that's me, David Waldman, reminds you that the Republican Party just endorsed a pedophile to serve in the U.S. Senate and a tax plan that hurts coal miners. Bored with all the winning yet? I'm sure you've probably had enough, all you Trump supporters who are listening to the show. Of course, there are probably none, but if you, if you bump into one on your way to work, then by all means, let them know. It's been an interesting morning. I am reading more and more stories about Mike Pence and Mike Pence's wife trying desperately to distance themselves from Donald Trump, which, I suppose you can't really express a whole lot of surprise about it, although he is the vice president to the guy. But that's not always the closest relationship in the world. But, and I guess it shouldn't surprise you that people are going to find Donald Trump smarmy and disgusting, but align with him for political benefit. And so that is happening. And many other things, I guess, equally surprising / not surprising are also happening. The Republican National Committee back in the game for child molester Roy Moore, after cutting off support for Moore earlier in the special election over the allegations. They now realize it is safe, and everybody who disavowed him is going back in and joining forces and endorsing him and getting ready to welcome him into the United States Senate. It's getting close to where I think it's a fairly good shot that he gets a David Vitter standing ovation if he wins and finally arrives in Washington. Everyone who said that they were absolutely, positively, just simply not going to seat the man, they were going to engineer his expulsion if necessary, has changed their tune. Interestingly, it strikes me now that they wanted him on hand in order to have his vote for the tax bill. Now, the tax bill has, of course, passed the Senate. And although you and I both know that the differences between the House and Senate bill now need to be reconciled in one way or another, not through reconciliation. That's the reconciled here is just an expression. It's not a formal term of art. We're not talking about a specific procedure here, though there are specific procedures, a range of specific procedures for making sure the House and Senate do vote to approve, if that's what they're going to do, the same bill. And there's a procedural story about that, and of course we'll have to share that because this is the only radio show that does procedure, I think. So we'll catch up on that story. But I guess it throws the whole motivation of backing the child molester Roy Moore into question. I mean, it was always in question. They really only just wanted his vote because they want to wield power in Washington. That's kind of what it's all about, so it's not surprising. But if the whole excuse is, well, we need him for the big tax reform, quote-unquote tax reform vote, well, that's kind of over, and maybe they don't need him for that. Of course, they might need him for the vote on the conference report, or for that matter, for the vote to go to conference. I understand there was some controversy in the House on the motions, voting on the motions to go to conference, and my guess is that the Freedom Caucus and other ultra-rightist wackos were trying to make some kind of last-minute demands for something extraordinarily dumb, no doubt, and were threatening, I suppose, to withhold their votes on the motions to go to conference, which would have been a hilarious way for this thing to end, but no such luck. However, the House seems ready to go to conference, and they're going to have a lot of work to do. Did I put this story away? I know that I saw it last night, and it's not immediately obvious to me now, maybe because I parked too many things late night and in pocket here, but we'll see if we can come up with it. I know it's in here somewhere, or at least it can be called up later on, but I guess this fumbling around gives me the opportunity to address Scott's request here. He says he'd like to hear a discussion on how we are so easily led into torching ourselves on such things. We're talking about we will be talking about. I'm telling you now that we're going to try to talk about MSNBC, I guess, not firing so much as severing. I don't know. Does he? Well, we'll find out. They're saying severing relationships. That is to say firing if you're a regular contributor. I think he's a contributor status kind of guy, not a regular televised program with MSNBC. But they're getting rid of. They're not paying Sam Seder anymore because something. Essentially, a single, as it says here in this Mother Jones article headline, single lame joke from 8 years ago. Kevin Drum has written this one up. I don't know how lame the joke is. By now, you've likely heard the story, and even if you've only heard it in passing, like mine, like the way I have, rather, you would have gotten some indication of what the story's about. If not, let's let Kevin Drum tell us. MSNBC cuts off Sam Seder over a single lame joke from 8 years ago. And it kicks off with some embedded tweets. Chris Hayes here tweeting, the entire culture and our politics are now dominated by people who have weaponized bad faith and shamelessness. That's a good indication of where we're going with this thing. Hayes is responding to the fact that MSNBC has, quote, severed ties with Sam Seder. And why did they do that? Because 8 years ago, Seder made a joke on Twitter about Roman Polanski. Now, if that's all you heard, you might think, oh, he's inappropriately laughing about Roman Polanski being a child molester. Well, you got to wait and hear the thing and consider the context. But of course, once you're considering context, you know how we are in this country. If you're considering context, you're losing. Even though that's sort of the mark of an intelligent mind. But okay, here's the tweet, and it's from September 29th, 2009. Don't care, Ray Polanski, but I hope if my daughter is ever raped, it is by an older, truly talented man with a great sense of mise en scène. Okay. You've probably heard, discussed by now what this is all about. But if not, what seems to be happening here is a reaction to, a long-time issue around Roman Polanski and what the hell to do with this guy. Is he a talented filmmaker? You know what? I don't even really know. I'd have no basis for evaluating that absent any controversy about him whatsoever. But people who say they know what they're doing with respect to the film industry say, yeah, sure, talented guy, makes good films, has a fairly serious problem, makes good films. Bad enough problem that we don't really want him to make any more films and whatever. But okay, is the joke pro child molestation or rape? No, it's not. It is, I think, I'm fairly certain, and he's said as much, meant to actually make fun of people who are trying to defend Polanski based on the fact that he's also got some talent for legitimate things that you can do with yourself besides, aside from the illegitimate, like raping children. You could be a good filmmaker. Now, you hope you could do one without the other. And we hope that it's the filmmaking and not the raping of the children, to be honest. But what he's doing here is saying, basically, how tongue-in-cheek do you have to be here? I hope if my daughters are... Now, who hopes that their daughter is ever raped? But if it is, I hope it's by an older, truly talented man with a great... Yeah, right? You see what's going on here. Was it a dumb joke? Kevin Drum asks. Sure, I guess so. Should people be blackballed for making dumb jokes? Nope. Should anybody really care about this tweet? No. Even some conservatives agree that nobody should care about this. So, why does MSNBC care about it? Apparently because the man who brought us Pizzagate, the story that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring out of a Washington, D.C. pizza joint, has spent the last month demanding that they care. Let's tote up the scorecard here. NBC News. NBC News passed on the Harvey Weinstein story. They harbored a sexual abuser for years, even though, quote, everyone knew, unquote, what Matt Lauer was up to. Ditto for Mark Halperin. But thanks to the demands of a lunatic conservative, they cut off Sam Seder for a single lame joke made on Twitter in 2009. What the hell is in the water these days at 30 Rock? And the answer, of course, is, please don't hurt me-ism. And the hope that by holding liberals to account and very pointedly not holding conservatives to account, we'll talk about that in a minute, everyone will therefore in the future dismiss all accusations that the NBC management is hopelessly biased in favor of liberals, because after all, look what they did to liberals and look at the past they gave conservatives, and so therefore the criticism is unwarranted and we should probably stop it. Well, obviously that's never going to happen, and giving in to these guys only encourages them to do more and demand more. They will not appreciate what you did for them last time. That's not part of their game. That's not even part of their personality. It's not something they can do. I mentioned giving a pass to Republicans. I think as long as we're adding context, as long as I'm fumbling around looking for context, this Brian Beutler tweet caught my eye this morning as relevant to the situation, and then Brian later tweeted, in fact, that it struck him that it was relevant to the situation, but he was talking about something completely different. He was talking about Corey Lewandowski's tweet reading or quoting Megyn Kelly's tweet. Apparently, Megyn Kelly, who has now moved over to NBC, had booked the notorious scumbag Corey Lewandowski for her show. Why? He's got a book coming out. So people consider that newsworthy. I don't think the guy should have a book coming out. I don't think anybody should help him promote the book. But in media world, that's like a legitimate thing. They can't get enough of people who have books, which is amazing because really for television and radio and news, nothing is more anti-book, honestly. They want nothing more than for you to spend your time doing anything but reading. They want you watching television or listening to their programs, perhaps on radio, but I don't know, broadcast media and print, but particularly long-form print, book publishing, they don't even have maybe they have some investment stakes in the publishing world. They probably do, but that's not their core business. Anyway, Megyn Kelly, I guess, booked Corey, and he canceled for whatever reason. and she was miffed about that, so she said something. So Megyn Kelly tweets on, I guess, on today, earlier, 7:30 or so this morning. Update, Lewandowski canceled late last night on behalf of himself and Bossy, David Bossy. Still has currency and still out there. More time for Naomi Judd, who is opening up regarding daughter Ashley's Me Too story and Naomi's mental illness. Hooray. There's more time on that. That's good. Anyway, that's what she tweeted. Corey Lewandowski tweets, Megyn gets the lowest ratings in more than a decade for Today Show franchise. Congrats. Taking a stab at her for being upset that he canceled. By the way, he capitalizes the word lowest in lowest ratings. He's very Trumpian in that. I think maybe Trump drafted that tweet and sent it to him via Morse code, perhaps. Maybe that was exactly how it worked. Anyway, Brian, back to the beginning of this thought. Brian had commented, this scumbag, Lewandowski, can get caught lying on NBC news programs, accept invitations on NBC shows for the purposes of reneging and attacking the host, and NBC still lays out the welcome mat for him. There won't be any end to Corey Lewandowski appearances, happily arranged, on NBC Air. Now, on the other hand, Sam Seder, years ago, made a joke attacking people who were defending Roman Polanski because he was so talented. Maybe it's okay if he rapes children. That upset NBC enough to say, well, we're going to have to sever our ties with this guy because of the joke he made on the right side of history several years ago. And apparently there's another such story now in circulation. MSNBC has, I guess, been touch and go with Joy Reid, who does, in fact, host an on-air program for the network. And, well, my understanding of this from a distance has been, there's been a strange convergence, a strange alliance, whether it's formal or not, among her foes in Bernie Sanders fandom, who are constantly at odds with her because she's constantly outspoken and fighting with them over the results of the 2016 election, over the way it was conducted. She, like Armando, our own Armando, and many others, are very outspoken in their resentment of how the campaign went and how Bernie supporters continually undermine not only Hillary Clinton but other Democrats in their view. And well, obviously Bernie supporters feel very differently about it, but there is definitely a subset of Bernie Sanders supporters who have been very bitter about their feud with Joy Reid and would be only too glad to see her go. Also, of course, there are alt-right figures who are just glad to see any Democrat go from any place, whether elected or otherwise. And if it could be a black woman on top of it all, well, that would just be fantastic. So they're only too happy to help. So apparently, from several directions, that they've been working the refs over at MSNBC to see if they can't get her fired. This write-up of it from NBC News, as a matter of fact, by Brooke, Brooke Sopelsa? I think I'm getting that one right. This is from December 3rd. MSNBC host Joy Reid issued an apology on Sunday for a series of blog posts nearly a decade ago, mostly critical of former Governor Charlie Crist of Florida, that have been criticized as homophobic and anti-gay. I don't know anything about the blog posts, but of course, well, I suppose that could happen. Let's go see what we think of this. This one I've followed even less. This note is my apology to all who are disappointed by the content of blogs I wrote a decade ago, and that's something of an issue in itself, for which my choice of words and tone have legitimately been criticized. Sounds fair enough, or at least accommodating enough. Reid said in a statement shared with NBC News, which, like MSNBC, is owned by NBC Universal. The blog posts were unearthed on Thursday by Twitter user Jamie Maz. about whom I know nothing. From 2007 to 2009, Joy Ann Reid authored a dozen homophobic posts, not only attempting to out Charlie Crist as gay, she attacked and mocked him for being so. Jamie Maz wrote in the first of a series of tweets about Reid, Joy Ann Reid, that is. The Twitter user noted Reid repeatedly referred to Crist as Miss Charlie in her posts and speculated that his 2008 marriage to a woman was a fraud and part of a Veep marketing strategy. Okay, this does pose a particular issue in that, for instance, I have seen someone about whom I don't think anybody has any doubts as to whether or not he's homophobic. And I think the answer would be an overwhelming no there. But I've seen, let's say, Mitch McConnell referred to by Howie Klein, who, I don't think anybody stands up straight and says, yeah, sure, Howie Klein, huge homophobe. That's not likely going to convince anybody. And he always refers to Mitch McConnell as Miss McConnell based on, I assume, widespread rumors that he, too, might be gay or might have some dark history. I don't know what would make it dark, except that he's trying to keep it dark. That is to say, keeping the light of truth from off of it in his past. But, people have said the same things. But I suppose there's an argument to be made about some people being, perhaps more at ease or more entitled to the labeling than others in certain circumstances. But anyway, I don't know. I don't know anything about Jamie Maz either. Does anybody know? Here's an embedded tweet. We could take a look then at the profile, see what that reveals for us. But who knows what we're going to learn from this. Nothing in the profile here. So let's see. You could read a couple of tweets, I guess, and try and figure out where they're coming from. But, even that actually doesn't really tell you that much anymore, as I find more and more that conservatives are spending considerable amounts of time building up what appears to be Twitter profiles of liberals and just pretending to be one of them. I don't know whether that's the case here. I got no idea. It just happens to be out there as part of the game. But at any rate, let's see. So the Twitter user, we're talking about Jamie Maz here, noted Reid repeatedly referred to Crist as Miss Charlie in her posts and speculated that his 2008 marriage to a woman was a fraud and part of a Veep marketing strategy. Here's one of the tweets from, it basically says exactly that. It has some screen caps of Reid's blog, thanks to the Wayback Machine. I guess it goes that far back. February 2007 was the date of the posts. During the time she wrote those blog posts, Reid was a morning talk radio host, and blogger covering Florida politics. I'm in trouble now. Among the frequent subjects of my post was then Governor Charlie Crist, at the time a conservative Republican whose positions on issues like gay marriage and adoption by same-sex couples in Florida shared headlines with widely rumored reports that he was hiding his sexual orientation, Reid wrote in her apology. This sounds like where I would have gone with explanation anyway, but we'll let her continue. At no time have I intentionally sought to demean or harm the LGBT community, which includes people whom I deeply love. My goal, in my ham-handed way, was to call out potential hypocrisy, Reid added. And that happens. People do that. And it's not always well received. Sometimes it's actually sort of, everybody gets it, and it's just kind of given the general thumbs up / pass. Although I presume that there were always people sort of giving an eye roll to the whole thing and saying, this isn't really the way to do this. And people have gotten better about doing it in the time since, I think. But it's not that long ago, so fine. Let's talk about it. Crist, who served as Florida's governor from 2007 to 2011, supported a state constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage in 2008. He later apologized as Reed is doing, for supporting the amendment, telling Watermark Online, okay, an online LGBT publication based in Orlando, okay, there you have it. I'm sorry I did that. It was a mistake. I was wrong. Please forgive me. Now it is Reed who is seeking forgiveness for, as she put it, insensitive, tone-deaf, and dumb comments. In addition to friends and coworkers and viewers, I deeply apologize to Congressman Christ, who was the target of my thoughtlessness. My critique of anti-LGBT positions he once held but has since abandoned was legitimate in my view. My means of critiquing it were not, she wrote. Rereading those old blog posts, I am disappointed in myself, as often happens when people grow, but I apologize to those who are disappointed in me. Life can be humbling, it often is, but I hope that you know where my heart is and that I always strive to use my words for good. I know better and I will do better, Reed wrote. Widespread sentiment I have seen in my own Twitter feed, which is, of course, admittedly and purposely biased, is that, look, she's apologized, why don't we accept it and move on from there, as opposed to throwing a prominent liberal black woman voice off of MSNBC when we've all just spent all this time clamoring for more such voices on MSNBC and elsewhere in the media. So, yeah, very interesting. And very interesting, by the way. I don't think that Kevin Drum made any mention of who we were talking about when we were talking about the conservative activist and Pizzagate conspiracy theorist who is trying to get rid of Sam, and I guess successfully has gotten rid of Sam Cedar on MSNBC. It's Mike Cernovich, who, we really have no business taking any cues from whatsoever. So that one clearly the more egregious than the Joy Reid in terms of outcomes so far. But yeah, legitimate question. Scott asked, what the hell are we doing? We'll consider it more after the break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I have spent the break searching for the story I was fairly certain I had parked in Pocket that explained the procedural issues that had arisen during consideration of the tax bill. And it was really kind of fascinating, and apparently it never made it to Pocket, and that's problematic, and I'm trying to see if I can figure out where did it come from. And I don't know, I thought it might have been reported in the Hill. I might have to sort of Google this stuff up. But anyway, this to continue with the story from earlier, Sam Cedar's termination, whatever you might want to call it, from MSNBC, and the threat to Joy Reid as well. It's food for thought, certainly. Karen asked, basically saying, I guess before we got into the fact that the Joy Reid story was also, had been suggested to me by Scott and was open on the desktop, saying, odd coincidence that Cedar News comes on the heels of attempt to fire Joy Reid. Feels like more to come, and maybe time to take a cold eye to your archives. And I guess everybody could and should. My particular archives, I don't know. I assume that, like anybody, you can find something in there probably on the very same subjects and say it was poorly done. But archives are archives. There's hardly any point in trying to purge your archives, although I guess I would do better in purging my archives than some others who are like more famous and more widely read. But I suppose I could be able to pull it off. But I'm tired. I'm far too lazy to go back and try and do that. And of course, if I wrote it, I wrote it, and we have to figure it. It has to be on the record, just as it was then. And my records are out there too. I'm trying to think. I just sort of offhand, I'm certain something. I mean, we've had controversy even on this show in the past, right? Karen continues here. The funny thing about the Reed hoopla is that I could dig up any number of 5 to 10-year-old Daily Kos comments where users snarked about Ann Coulter being a man. Oh, sure, no doubt about that. Having an Adam's apple, being a trans man. I don't think I ever went that far to think she was a trans man, but anyway, all transphobic stuff. Guarantee there were some Sanders supporters among them. Yes, absolutely. And some Hillary Clinton supporters, and probably me, and who knows, you, or, something that could, what's worse, of course, is that there are things that could be intentionally misconstrued that way. That happens with fair frequency, not just Republicans against Democrats, but among Democrats themselves. And I don't know, we really do need to figure out a path forward here, but I don't know, there's no real rationale for trying to hammer out a policy. It's just sort of, you're going to have to take each case as it comes. Why Mike Cernovich cares about getting rid of Sam Cedar's contributor contract to MSNBC, I can't quite figure out. It's just, I guess they figure any scalp is a good scalp, even if nobody cares about the scalp before. Once you get it, you can wave it around and everybody kind of enjoys that. I assume that's what this is all about. And it does, it does raise an issue and a problem that these sorts of fates tend to befall Democrats, and maybe it's a structural weakness that, particularly when it's exploited by the alt-right, they know exactly what they're doing here. Just as we expressed this surprise about how could the Russians have been as sophisticated to know how to target their efforts, and we might ask the same thing about the alt-right. Not that they're foreign, but that they're for the most part quite stupid people, but they do know how to stab people in the back and twist the knife, and that's really all they're interested in doing. And they will intentionally misread anything they can and try and fan flames of controversy about it among their own supporters, who are only too happy to pretend they see the same thing that people like Cernovich make up about the tweets that they grab from out of context or whatever. And at some point, we're going to have to come up with some method of responding to these things, like really just recognizing it for what it is. I mean, we all know that Cernovich is, Cernovich will describe himself to you if you give him the chance as a alt-right online troll. And, we used to recognize stuff like this all the time. When Republicans would point this sort of thing out, we knew it right away as concern trolling. That's like almost the original context in which the troll word emerged online in my, my memory. Have we forgotten that all they're doing here is concern trolling? They're expressing concern, like, oh my goodness, like what does Mike Cernovich care if Sam Cedar is, making an honest statement there about how he hopes his daughter is raped by an older artist. I doubt that very much, but let's say he's being honest, which he isn't, and thinks that's a real thing. Why does he even care that that's happening on MSNBC? You'd think that would be great for them. They would say, look what happens on MSNBC. MSNBC says such things, sponsors and endorses such statements. They're terrible. Don't watch them. They're fake news. But instead, he's worried about the purity of MSNBC, and MSNBC believes him. That's incredible. I guess another possible interesting angle is, since at least some of Joy Reid's criticism has come from the left, I mean, I don't really know how they made their decision, but in evaluating the decision-making process in hindsight and from the outside, on the one hand, you could look at this and say, well, so far, they have not decided to get rid of Joy Reid, and so maybe it occurs to them, yeah, the optics, I mean, whatever it is that settles the cases, if it settles it on the right side, at least it gives you pause and a chance to evaluate what you're doing and say, maybe they said, well, the optics of firing who might be the only black woman host we have on any of our shows. I don't really know the MSNBC lineup, but she clearly was one of the first. The optics of that, particularly for the market we think we're aiming at, although I have never really been clear on what MSNBC thinks it's doing. I don't know. I don't know who's making the decisions over there. But they may have thought ahead enough to say, yeah, that's going to look really bad. That we cannot do. Whereas the white guy, maybe we can get rid of him and not have everybody come down on us like a ton of bricks. Well, we'll see about that. But I guess the other way of looking at it, on the other hand, is, well, with Sam Seder, who was complaining about him? Answer: conservative concern trolls. With Joy Reid, who was complaining about her? And the answer is, at least in part, a bunch of liberal hippies. So what ends up happening? Well, we'll take the complaint of the conservative concern trolls seriously because please don't hurt us anymore. Whereas the concerns of the liberal hippies, who cares about that? So I guess that's the goal. If you're looking to immunize yourself to such things, but know that it's foolish to try to erase your online history. I suppose you can go back, you can concern troll yourself. What you need to do is you need to establish a fake identity on Twitter as a Bernie Sanders supporter, and then concern troll yourself as that person, and then the MSNBC management will say, oh, we don't listen to idiot liberal hippies when it comes to personnel decisions. We will accept the apology and move on from there. Whereas if you're unfortunately caught by conservative concern trolls, you're doomed because they just can't roll over fast enough for those guys. I don't know. Maybe that's a lesson to take away from it. Do I think that's the explanation for how things came out? Probably not, but it's pretty compelling now that I think about it. Okay, let's see. A couple other items for consideration in our comments here. Let's see. What have we? Athena says that's why Tom Steyer should stop putting up billboards and producing commercials and backing progressive voices. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. And she also notes they got rid of Melissa Harris Perry first. That's true. And I recall that was the case. And so they made a 1-for-1 swap. Well, which suggests that optics is perhaps a bigger issue for them than we thought. Or at least that I was at first willing to say, but maybe now I've convinced myself. Let's see. What else have we got here? Michael Musson was saying, if Joy Reid had sexually harassed 20-plus women and then repeatedly attacked them as liars, I will be the first to call for her impeachment as an anchor. Okay, well, that's out there too. All right, let's see. What is this? Oh, yes, right. Important context for the Sam Seder thing. I think we touched on it, but Cargo 21, or as the Twitter handle goes, Black Jack Ewok. Did I get that right? Tweets me Matthew Gertz's tweet here. Important context for the Seder tweet. He tweeted it in, September 2009, at a time when progressives were criticizing Washington Post columnists and others for defending Polanski. There is a Media Matters piece from the day before the tweet that sort of sets up that context. And I know I've seen it. let's take another look at it just by way of laying out more context here. But yeah, essentially what was happening here, Jamison Falzer, as a matter of fact, was decrying the movement at the time among Washington Post columnists, including the really rather execrable Richard Cohen, saying Roman Polanski shouldn't be imprisoned for his rape charges, and putting it this way, time does not minimize the crime, which in its details is creepy, but jail would no longer serve a purpose. I mean, it's an argument that gets made from time to time, but usually not about that. He soft pedals the whole thing, and it's not just him. Anne Applebaum apparently makes a similar statement. He did commit a crime, but he has paid for the crime in many, many ways. In notoriety, in lawyers' fees, in professional stigma. He could not return to Los Angeles to receive his most recent Oscar. Yeah, that I think pretty rightfully set Jameson off too, and probably all the rest of you too. Like, who cares? The guy can't get his Oscar, and oh no, he paid for it in lawyers' fees. Well, if that was all you had to do, drop a box of cash on somebody's doorstep and say, "Well, rape schmape, I paid, so let me go." Well, that ain't gonna work. Anyway, it's worse, and there's more detail here, by the way, although all it ends up doing is convincing us that Anne Applebaum is worse than we thought, and Richard Cohen not worse than we thought. We already thought he was terrible. So I'll give you the link, and you can review the rest of it for yourself, but I think it's nothing we didn't know going in from the rest of the context, but some good details, and frankly a good reason to remember that you probably were at the time steamed at Cohen and Applebaum, and it was very much deserved at the time. So anyway, good context for that. Sad to see how this thing is developing, but definitely other stories that we might need to catch up on. I can't come up with, I'm going to have to spend the next break trying to Google to find the, I got it. Never mind. Wow. Terrific. I just had to scroll enough to find this thing. Here's the piece that I referred to earlier about the procedural mistakes, one of the procedural mistakes, not the story about almost not agreeing to go to conference in the House, but on the tax abomination recently passed. Eric Levitz in New York Magazine has this piece. The Senate GOP accidentally killed some of its donors' favorite tax breaks. Well, isn't that funny? It is, and it creates some procedural problems going forward. Ready for this one? On Friday, Senate Republicans rewrote the American tax code over lunch and passed their partially handwritten legislation around 2 a.m. the following morning. By the way, lots of criticism and or pushback from Republicans, chiefly, that there really is nothing outlandish about handwritten amendments to a bill, and there's nothing outlandish about them. That is true. There frequently are handwritten amendments offered, but one, they're usually offered at markup in the committee process. Two, there was no markup or committee process for this tax bill. They are pretty rare on the House floor, and even rarer still when no one has seen the original text up until the day of the vote, and it comes in an unsearchable PDF, and it's almost 500 pages, and it's a revision of the tax code, and it's also got handwritten amendments. It was a very unusual combination of circumstances, and the people who defended it as commonplace because handwritten amendments have been offered in the past are doing so from a place of serious dishonesty, and they suck and they're bastards, and you should shun them from polite society. So there, that makes it easy. One of the people with whom I had a brief exchange over the weekend is such a person. and of course considers himself to be a big-time both sideser and an independent, and I've criticized Republicans and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, he's since blocked me, so F that guy. Anyway, I was right, and he was wrong. He was stupid to be offering these things. He was an original, and I butted into the argument. That's true, so I don't really care a great deal that it ended in being blocked. But he was having this discussion, or attempting to have this discussion, with Norm Ornstein, and it was absurd to be... I mean, he's like mansplaining procedure to Norm Ornstein at this point, which was really ridiculous. And they both of these two, I don't even remember the guy's name. I can't look him up either because I'm blocked. But I could scroll back into tweets. They're both bending over backwards to praise you. Oh, I respect you, but. Oh, I respect you, but. Well, so this is what he's offering. And basically it came down in the end to saying, just trust me. I worked for 20 years on the Hill, and it's not uncommon to have handwritten amendments. Well, everybody knows it's not uncommon. Well, at least anybody who's worked on the Hill knows it's not uncommon. But what is uncommon is to have that many of that great a consequence that late in the process when there's been no other process. So that we also had idiots like taking to Twitter and saying, well, the Declaration of Independence was handwritten and that worked out just fine. Yeah, right. Okay, fine. They didn't debate the Declaration of Independence, right? There was no committees, no debate, no discussion. They just wrote it at lunchtime and asked everybody to stay until 2 a.m. to vote on independence. Perfect analogy. That's the kind of dumb stuff that's out there. Anyway, here's what happened as a result of this very dumb process. On Friday, Senate Republicans rewrote the tax code over lunch and passed their partially handwritten legislation around 2 a.m. the following morning. Dylan Scott tweeting about it at the time, saying, when the order is real regular, and including this picture of, I guess, a screen grab of the PDF that came out of the text of the bill. Not at all weird, very regular, very normal, he says. And here's a shot of a particular section of the bill with lots of handwritten notes in the margin and scratch outs, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it happens. It's just usually there's time to figure out what the hell's going on before you vote. No such luck here. Mitch McConnell never subjected his blueprint for restructuring the world's largest economy to a single hearing. His caucus never invited experts to offer insight into the bill's implications for housing, healthcare, higher education, outsourcing, or tax evasion. This haste had an upside for the Senate GOP, as I need to remember to call them from now on. It allowed the party to pass deeply unpopular changes to the tax code before the public had time to learn about them. But approaching major legislation like an Adderall-addled sophomore approaches an overdue term paper came with a minor drawback. And that's going to, one day, Adderall-addled sophomores are going to look back on this and say, we demand that you be fired from New York Magazine for having said that. Here's what the minor drawback it came with was. It forced the party to pass a tax bill before they had time to read it. It wasn't just the public and Democrats who didn't get a chance. They didn't either. In hindsight, McConnell should have asked for an extension. While Republicans were manically outlining their plans to take from the poor and give to the Trumps, they also accidentally nullified all of their corporate donors' favorite deductions. Whoops. Wow. How did it happen? This screw-up, like most of the tax plan's oddest features, was born of a math problem. Due to arcane Senate rules, and we'll see if we can't figure out what they are and explain them rather than just glossing over them. Due to arcane Senate rules, the Trump tax cuts can only add $1.5 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. That Senate rule then would be reconciliation. The reconciliation instructions only provided for the $1.5 trillion deficit hike, and we learned the other day that the old but since repealed Conrad rule was the one that fooled us all into thinking that reconciliation can't be used to add to the deficit over the next decade. That's right. It didn't you couldn't until, of course, Republicans realized that they would need to do that in a big way and repealed the rule. Anyway, so due to arcane Senate rules that have been changed, the tax cuts can only add $1.5 trillion over the next decade to the deficit. Last Thursday, the Senate tax bill already cost about that sum. And then McConnell started making expensive promises to his few holdouts. Susan Collins wanted a $10,000 property tax deduction for Americans in high-tax states. Ron Johnson wanted a 23% business income deduction for the company that his family owns. Usually gets you thrown out of Congress when you do stuff like that, but not here. This left the Senate Majority Leader searching under the tax code's couch cushions for new sources of revenue. Eventually, he came upon the corporate alternative minimum tax. At present, most corporations face a 35% statutory rate on their income. But by availing themselves of various tax credits and deductions, most companies can get their actual rates down far below that figure. To put a limit on just how far, the corporate AMT prevents companies from paying any less than 20% on their profits, or more precisely, on the profits that they fail to hide overseas. The GOP/GOP, the GOP, had originally intended to abolish the alternative minimum tax, but on Friday, with the clock running out and money running short, Senate Republicans put the AMT back into their bill. Unfortunately for McConnell, they forgot to lower the AMT after doing so. This is a big problem. The Senate bill brings the normal corporate rate down to 20%. While leaving the alternative minimum rate at 20%. The legislation would still allow corporations to claim a wide variety of tax credits and deductions. It just renders them all completely worthless. Companies can either take no deductions and fill out their income tax on a postcard, I guess, and pay a 20% rate, the minimum, or they can take lots of deductions and also pay a 20% rate. And all the deductions, of course, cost all that work and paperwork and time and energy. So you're stuck with 20% either way. In other words, they were eliminating the alternative minimum tax. They had to change their mind because they were giving away too many gifts to holdout senators. They put the alternative minimum tax back in there in order to make it, in order to find pay-fors for these giveaways to Collins and Johnson and others. And when they put it back in, because they were doing it by hand, probably, they forgot to say, okay, well, now the alternative minimum tax rate for corporations is back on, but it's 15% or 10%. They just said, well, scratch out the part that eliminates it and leave it the way it is. So now, corporate tax rates down to 20%, whether you take deductions or not. With this blunder, Senate Republicans have achieved the unthinkable. They've written a giant corporate tax cut that many of their corporate donors do not like. As the Wall Street Journal reports, and here we have a large segment taken from Wall Street Journal reporting, probably hidden by a firewall, so you're getting one for free here. Ready? The biggest consequence could be the research credit, often used by manufacturers, technology firms, and pharmaceutical companies, and the National Association of Manufacturers said it was working with policymakers to address the issue. Under the credit, companies get money back from the government for what they spend on innovation, often for wages of scientists and engineers. Corporations will claim $10.3 billion in research credits in 2018, according to the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation. Murray Energy Corporation, an Ohio-based firm. There's a little ellipsis here, by the way. Something's missing, but we don't know what. Murray Energy Corp, an Ohio-based firm and the largest privately held U.S. coal mining company, complained that the AMT decision and the Senate's tougher limits on interest deductions made a mockery out of so-called tax reform. Oh, no. Not a mockery. Robert Murray, the company's chief executive officer, said the Senate tax plan would raise his company's tax bill by $60 million. Hooray! They finally did something right? What the Senate did in their befuddled mess drove me out of business and then bragged about the fact that they got some tax reform passed, Mr. Murray said in an interview on Sunday. This is not job creation. This is not stimulating income. This is driving a whole sector of our community into non-existence, which is not bad for a coal company, of course. But by the way, see how he screws this whole thing up. It's not job creation. Well, that's true. It was never going to be job creation, even if it worked as intended. But then the second part, this is not stimulating income. I think he means, an economic stimulus, but stimulating income, that it wasn't supposed to stimulate income for coal mining companies. It was all right. But anyway, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but fine. He's driving a whole sector of our community into non-existence, which, by the way, if a Democrat had said it, or a liberal had said it about something like, a particular industry or the middle class or something like that, there would be long screeds about how it's hyperbole and these hysterical Democrats are always thinking everything is the end of the world. Well, now a conservative, privately held U.S. coal mining company's CEO says it's the end of his world, and the Wall Street Journal is only too happy to print it as stated. Okay, well, the article continues, and it gets a little bit complicated at some point, and perhaps it's already at that point. So we'll say that we'll slow it down a little bit, and we'll continue with the discussion after our short 1-minute top of the hour break. And that way you won't lose the thread in all this. But suffice to say that they seem to have screwed up pretty badly and made some major donors angry. Does this mean the death of the bill? No, of course not. They're going to go back and try and correct this stuff. But of course, it creates procedural complications. You can't just wave a wand and say it's all correct now. You have to go through a procedure. You have to propose the corrections. You got to have a vote. A vote? Oh, crap. Now you see it coming. We'll be right back. Welcome back once again to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We last left during or over the last break in the middle of this New York Magazine piece about the next big screw-up discovered in the Republican tax bill. And I hinted at you that it was going to create some serious issues. These votes are pretty close, and so anytime you can drive it back to the floor or try to recommit it to committee, whatever, as Democrats tried to do early on, was it Thursday or Friday that they tried with that vote? It creates headaches for the Republicans, and really any headache you can create at this point, you might as well go for it. McConnell's mistake had two big implications, writes Eric Levitz in the New York piece. First and foremost, it means the Senate will almost certainly have to vote on a tax bill again before one goes into law. Previously, it looked as though Paul Ryan had enough votes in the House to pass the Senate bill as is. This took pressure off the party's conference committee. That is, it's not the party's conference committee, but okay, I get what you're getting at. But it took pressure off of what would have been a conference committee. The House and Senate leaders tasked with reconciling each chamber's bills. Worst case scenario at the time, they thought, was the House could just rubber stamp the Senate's work. Now, that option is deeply undesirable. It remains overwhelmingly likely that Republicans will pass a giant tax cut, but now their task is a bit more difficult. The second implication, and by the way, I guess just to complete that thought, essentially that means that you have to either reject the Senate's revisions either outright or in large part and send back a different version, and the House really honestly isn't equipped to hammer that out, because once they open the thing up and say, well, we got to correct this AMT mistake, they're going to go back in and say, the senators just completely raided the place and wrote little, tax deductions for their own businesses into their bill. We want to do the same too. And Paul Ryan doesn't really want to open that can of worms this late in the game, and it will just create not only headaches, but delays and additional avenues of attack against the bill. But he probably couldn't get them to agree just to an AMT fix. In addition to which, he probably knows he needs to give away some SOPs to his own conference, and people are going to want special tax breaks for their businesses on the House side, but he can limit it in number and scope by saying, let's do this in conference, where only the people basically important enough to either make it to the conference committee or to have the ear of someone who is on the conference committee are going to be able to insert gifts for themselves. So conference it is. And instead of having done it right in the Senate and then being able to use the leverage of the threat of not filibuster, but holding out on being the 50th necessary Republican vote, instead of being able to use that leverage to say, look, it's so close in the Senate, you guys in the House just have to take what we gave you, don't amend it, send it back to us, besides which we will be able to pass it into law that much faster if you do that, and that usually works. Instead, they have to now vote to go to conference, where no doubt the Senate Republicans will try and use the same leverage again on their House counterparts anyway, but it creates more headache. That means votes in the House about going to conference, and apparently they had briefly had some trouble with that, and a vote in the Senate on the motion to go to conference, which they'll want to do because they screwed up this bill so badly, but which creates another voting opportunity and another time where Republicans are going to have to go on record and say yes to this thing. And this will mean bringing Susan Collins back for another vote and asking her to vote yes and let the process go forward on a bill that she's come out looking extraordinarily foolish on. Apparently, she was on the Sunday shows and was asked about this thing and what made you decide to go ahead with approving this piece of garbage. And she said, well, I was assured that it lowers the debt, it lowers the national debt and the deficit as well from year to year. And I think she was on Meet the Press, and Chuck Todd was just like, where did you hear that? That's actually, the opposite of what everybody, even Republicans, says about this bill. Oh, no, I was assured. I saw there was a study by so-and-so, and it turns out asking the people who did the study, they say, no, we never said that. So she's just made up out of thin air, essentially. I heard that it lowers the deficit and the debt. The question was posed to her in terms of after all these years of fretting about the debt and insisting, for instance, that Obama's stimulus package had to have a price tag under $1 trillion, et cetera, just for the optics of it, because I'm such a deficit hawk. How could you agree to add $1.5 trillion to the debt? Oh, well, it won't do that. Oh, but it will. Oh, but I already voted, so what can I tell you? I can't help you, sorry. Oh, but guess what? You're going to have to vote again, not only on the motions to go to conference, but now you're going to have to vote on a conference report, knowing now that you know that it's wrong what you thought, and that hasn't changed in the time since you voted to approve it the first time. Will you vote a second time to make the same stupid, quote, mistake? Now, the answer is yes, she will. But it becomes that much more troublesome and that much more embarrassing, presumably, if she has a conscience, which she might not. I don't know. Anyway, there's another implication out there, and we'll wrap up this article by reading about it. The second implication is that McConnell is going to need new revenue. That's a problem. In all probability, Republicans are going to drop the alternative minimum tax rate well below 20%. When they make this correction. That will put the bill's price tag over $1.5 trillion, which of course will put it out of keeping with the reconciliation instructions and pose a fairly serious problem, even without the Conrad rule on the books anymore. You said 1.5, Conrad said, right? Conrad rules said that Carmine said there would be 1.5 trillion. Here's 2. Right now, some of the House's most heinous revenue raisers, including the infamous tax on graduate student tuition, are not in the Senate bill. Did you know that? Chances are now somewhat higher that these odious provisions will make it into the final legislation, as Republicans will once again be desperate for pay-fors. That said, It is also possible that the GOP will simply revise their bill's corporate rate up to 22% now that President Trump has given the party permission to do so. Regardless, the AMT fiasco is bound to be the tip of an iceberg of unintended consequences. Senate Republicans wanted to pass their indefensible tax bill before anyone had time to figure out what was in it. They succeeded a bit more literally than they had planned. So it will slow things down a little bit. It will require a fix, and it may be just the first of several things that they discover they've done horribly, horribly wrong. And the question is, will they discover any more of them before they pass the bill and have an opportunity to, quote unquote, correct them? Or will they pass it into law, say it's genius, and then spend the rest of their lives correcting it? Well, probably the latter, and that's probably true of most major tax reforms anyway. But there you have it. Interesting and not unexpected. If you pass a law that's that wide in scope and you do it that rushed and that secretly, this will happen. That's why people simply accept as a good thing, without making much argument about it, that a open and transparent and lengthy, to be honest, lengthy process makes more sense and is just a good thing on its face. Okay, so we're up to speed on that one. Let's take a glance around and see what other stories we've got that we might want to treat in lightning round fashion, just to acknowledge that they're on, and then that they're on our radar, and then some things we'll want to read through more thoroughly. First of all, of course, the Bloomberg News report that Special Counsel Robert Mueller has subpoenaed Deutsche Bank records, specifically those of Donald Trump. Stephen Aarons had this story that had everyone talking, came out in the middle of the night, 2:16 a.m., and updated at 8:51 this morning. Mueller is said to ask about the bank's dealings with the president, and Trump owes the lender about $300 million for real estate loans. Those are the two bullet points at the top of the piece. Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller zeroed in on President Donald Trump's business dealings with Deutsche Bank AG as his investigation into alleged Russian meddling in the U.S. election widens. Mueller has issued a subpoena to Germany's largest lender. He actually issued it several weeks ago, forcing the bank to submit documents on its relationship with Trump and his family, according to a person briefed on the matter, who asked not to be identified because the action had not been announced. But now I guess it has been. Deutsche Bank always cooperates with investigating authorities in all countries, the lender said in a statement to Bloomberg Tuesday, declining to provide additional information, like the information that Deutsche Bank has for months rebuffed calls by Democratic lawmakers to provide more transparency over the roughly $300 million Trump owed to the bank for his real estate dealings prior to becoming president. Representative Maxine Waters of California and other Democrats have asked whether the bank's loans to Trump, made years before he ran for president, were in any way connected to Russia. The bank previously rejected those demands, saying sharing client data would be illegal unless it received a formal request to do so, by which they mean a subpoena from someone other than Congress, I guess. Trump has denied any wrongdoing. Big upshot of this one is, it's getting to the point where he's investigating Trump family finances, something for which Trump has already hinted that he would be willing to fire Mueller, although really, honestly, he's been, we've all speculated that he may just fire him regardless, whether or not he gets to the personal finances of the Trump family, since it just looks like he's going to lose, and Trump hates losing. All right. Other interesting stories of the day. Let's see. There's lots here. There's smaller bore stories like the debate, such as it is. There's really no debate. It's the wrong word for it. But the argument being advanced, it's not even really a good argument, but the blathering being advanced by those who insist that Donald Trump is not guilty of obstruction of justice, that his tweet the other day admitting to the obstruction of justice isn't what it seems like. And even if it was, presidents can't obstruct justice anyway, because it doesn't matter what the president does. If the president is doing it, it's not illegal. And so therefore, something, get out of jail free. Lots of people pushing back on that, of course, which is a bit of a waste of time, but because of the public relations and optics games we have to play these days, it has to happen. Bigger news that others are talking about that is out there includes the Trump White House plans for, or weighing plans for private spies to counter deep state enemies. You'll recall, of course, that crazy-ass Donald Trump and his idiotic cadre of advisors, they love coming up with this one, the idea that the deep state is against them, and that's why they're not getting their whatever the hell they're trying to do done. The Intercept has this story, the Trump White House weighing plans for private spies to counter deep state enemies. It's Matthew Cole and Jeremy Scahill on this piece, upshot of which is, unbelievably, that Eric Prince and possibly Oliver North and maybe even a few others are apparently discussing the idea that, well, if you don't trust your intelligence agencies, as Donald Trump has said he does not, and you don't trust the FBI because Donald Trump has just said he doesn't trust the FBI either, and it's all because they're deep state operatives and they hate Trump and they're out to get me, that I can't get anything done. So therefore, what I need is a private intelligence agency that can tell me all about all the lies that everybody else is spreading and recommend who I can push out of helicopters, I guess, to try and fix all of that. And I need Eric Prince and Oliver North to get to the truth here. That's what's going on. The lead says the Trump administration is considering a set of proposals developed by Blackwater founder Eric Prince, who has nothing whatsoever to do with the administration, of course, and a retired CIA officer, with assistance from Oliver North, a key figure from Iran-Contra, of course, to provide CIA Director Mike Pompeo and the White House with a global private spy network that would circumvent official U.S. intelligence agencies, according to several current and former U.S. intelligence officials and others familiar with the proposals. The sources say the plans have been pitched to the White House as a means of countering, quote, deep state enemies in the intelligence community seeking to undermine Trump's presidency, one of which might be the law and or the Constitution. But that's pretty deep as far as the state goes. The creation of such a program raises the possibility that the efforts would be used to create an intelligence apparatus to justify the Trump administration's political agenda. Oh, that sounds good. Pompeo can't trust the CIA bureaucracy, so we need to create this thing that reports just directly to him. In other words, stovepiping, but this time with private spies. So something they want that reports directly to him, said a former senior U.S. intelligence official with firsthand knowledge of the proposals in describing White House discussions. It is a direct action arm, totally off the books, this person said, meaning the intelligence collected would not be shared with the rest of the CIA or the larger intelligence community. The whole point is this is supposed to report to the president and Pompeo directly. Oliver North, who appears frequently on Trump's favorite TV network, Fox News, was enlisted to help sell the effort to the administration. He was the ideological leader brought in to lend credibility, said the former senior intelligence official. And I guess we could probably stop there. Oliver North is the guy brought in to lend credibility to it. Wow. Well, private's private, and I guess there's nothing you can do about it, and I guess it was only a matter of time till Eric Prince was providing that service on a rent-a-spy basis, as well as defense services. So, I don't know. I think we probably all should have seen it coming, but it's always startling to see the White House saying, yeah, we probably ought to consider some of that. Let's see. A few other quick hit stories, and then maybe some of the deeper things that we want to read more thoroughly. One, Business Insider, Natasha Bertrand, has this, as she has most of the Trump-Russia scoops for Business Insider. This one developed yesterday. I thought it was interesting. A little complex. but on what is becoming a bit player, Manafort. Yeah, he's actually been surpassed in terms of being the biggest fish brought in so far, I guess, with the Flynn plea agreement. Mueller just abruptly reversed course on his bail agreement with Manafort. This guy, Manafort, can't, keep his fingers out of the cookie jar, apparently. Special counsel Robert Mueller has abruptly reversed course on a bail agreement his office struck with Paul Manafort's legal team last week that would have allowed him to be released from GPS monitoring. I'm glad that they haven't finished on the GPS monitoring on this guy. When Flynn flipped, I was wondering, he's still wearing an ankle thing, right? So I guess he still is. Phew. Manafort evidently failed to tell the government, and this is a big problem for these guys. Jared Kushner is constantly failing to tell the government such things. He failed to tell the government he was ghostwriting a draft op-ed about his work in Ukraine as late as November 30th. He was working on it with a longtime Russian colleague who is, quote, assessed to have ties to Russian intelligence, according to the special counsel's court filing. That colleague was Konstantin Kilimnik, the Russian-Ukrainian citizen and longtime protege of Manafort, who he had used as a liaison to Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska during the campaign. A spokesman for Manafort declined to comment. Is that Jason Maloney? Hey, Jason, why won't you comment? The government said that the court had initially admonished Manafort's lawyer for making public statements to the press about the case, and on November 8th had barred both the parties and counsel from making statements that could interfere with a fair trial. Even if the ghost-written op-ed were entirely accurate, fair, and balanced, it would be a violation of this court's November 8 order if it had been published. The government argued the editorial clearly was undertaken to influence the public's opinion of defendant Manafort, or else there would be no reason to seek its publication. The filing continued, because Manafort has now taken actions that reflect an intention to violate or circumvent the court's existing orders, the government submits that the proposed bail package is insufficiently reasonable to assure his appearance as required. The government's prior general consent to the bail package presupposed that Manafort was complying with the court's existing orders. Well, he's not. So, bigger bail, maybe never losing the ankle monitor, and they should take all three of those passports, I would think. But anyway, it's skipping down to the end here. It's not immediately clear whether Manafort would still be under house arrest or if he would just be subject to continued GPS monitoring. The government asked the court in its latest filing that Manafort be required to report to pretrial services where he will be located during the upcoming week, including details of any planned travel and where he will be staying. So at least they're keeping a close eye on him again, and I'm glad for that news. Okay, a few other things to jump around to. What can we actually fit is another big question here. Well, here's an interesting piece here shared with me by several listeners, and let's see. Well, I don't know if I can get them all on the record here, but I know Kate Sherrill had sent me this thing, though I did see it from a couple of other sources as well via Twitter, but a good point, certainly. I guess this one originated with Alan Cross, with whom I'm not familiar, but he is a writer, an SBC minister, and works for a gospel-based racial unity, immigrant, and refugee advocacy group, and an author as well. Had this very interesting point shared by a lot of people with regard to Roy Moore. In case you were the kind of person who was inclined, for whatever reason, to give credence to the idea that, well, Roy Moore back in the day, back in the 70s and early 80s and maybe into the 90s and possibly still today, dating or courting very, very young women for the purpose of, or in some cases, just girls, for the purpose of having a large family because you need a young breeder wife, or however you want to put it, or just plain like the younger girls. How common was it down in Alabama in them days? Well, Alan Cross has a suggestion for some historical context. In 1957, Reverend Alvin C. Horn of Talladega, Alabama, resigned as Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama. Reverend, yes, you heard it right. Because he, being 45, married 15-year-old Barbara Richardson of Trenton, Georgia. He lied and said she was 20 to try and cover it up. I guess the Klan in 1957, though, thought that was just dang old wrong and couldn't stand by their man, Reverend Alvin C. Horn, and you're going to have to resign as Grand Dragon of the KKK. You're not moral enough to be Grand Dragon of the KKK because you're 45 and you married a 15-year-old. Even if you wanted a large family, it just can't happen. Now, that's the implication, but I know that it's really that folks in the Klan in those days didn't like people from Trenton, Georgia. Trenton, that's New Jersey. That's a Yankee. No, Trenton, Georgia. Well, too dang close, I say. And there's a newspaper write-up from the Montgomery Advertiser of 1961. It says here that tells the same story. So, man, and by the way, they refer to her as a child bride in this piece, and that's kind of like you suck in the air through the teeth on that one. But, it's good enough for the United States Senate. It didn't pass muster for the Klan of 1957, though. And, gosh, it's kind of a weird bit, don't you think? Makes you uncomfortable. All right, let's see. Other stories. Oh, yes, I mentioned but didn't read the story. I included it included the links for the roundup, so you might have clicked through in Scott's summary about the McClatchy reporting on the Trump organization abandoning Donald Trump's false promise that they would do no more international deals. But this isn't even the first one out of the box, I don't think. But it's happening again. And I thought I would at least share the lead on this so you know where it's happening. Anita Kumar for McClatchy on this one. Despite pledge, Trump company works with a foreign entity again. A construction company owned in part by the governments of Saudi Arabia and South Korea plans to build a Trump-branded luxury resort development in Indonesia, despite a vow from Donald Trump that his family business would not make any deals with foreign government entities while he serves as president. Not just all foreign deals, as he hoped people would understand from his statement, but he now then revises to, well, I won't be working in partnership with foreign governments. Well, you will, and here it is. Trump's partner, MNC Land, recently entered into a preliminary agreement with POSCO E&C Indonesia to become the main contractor for the first phase of the development, build in promotional material as a Trump community that includes a Disney-like theme park, a 6-star hotel, and a golf course. 6-star diamonds. Thanks, Joey No Socks, for coming up with the 6. You know what? 6 is boring and mundane. 7, 8, 9 stars. That's what we've got. And a golf course, amazingly. MNC Land, through its subsidiary PT Lido Nirwana Parahyangan, I hope, and POSCO E&C Indonesia officials signed a memorandum of understanding on November 11th at a ceremony in Jakarta that was attended by several high-level government officials from Indonesia and South Korea and was widely covered in the foreign media. We are building a 6-star hotel in cooperation with Trump Hotel Collection and following golf course and golf park as well. Well, it's not the best English, but it was the statement of the managing director of the MNC project called Lido City at the ceremony. That's the purpose of today's event. I could try and give you the guy's name, Andrian Budi Utama. Anyway, you're getting the idea here. POSCO E&C Indonesia is a subsidiary of POSCO E&C, if you can envision that one, which is partly owned by Saudi Arabia's 3-decade-old public investment fund. That's the connection. That fund acquired 38% of POSCO E&C in 2015. becoming the second largest shareholder as part of a deal that calls for the company to work on infrastructure projects commissioned by the Saudi government, which is to say the Saud family. As a result, the fund recommended 2 members to the company's 6-member board, an executive, one of them with Saudi-owned oil giant Aramco, and chairman of Saudi-based ACWA, a developer of power generation and desalinated water production plants. We'll have more details after this. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. We left off just before the break reading about the tangled web of ownership in or behind this Lido City project, a Trump community being built in Indonesia, basically by contractors, partly owned, being the second largest shareholder, by, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, and a couple of their board members are, I guess, overlapping to the board of POSCO ENC. It gets more complicated, of course, than even that. We learned POSCO ENC Indonesia is a subsidiary of POSCO ENC, partly owned by the Public Investment Fund. There's more, though. POSCO ENC itself is an affiliate of POSCO, without the ENC, which is itself partly owned by the governments of Saudi Arabia and South Korea. Here comes the South Korean influence here. According to the company's independent auditor's report dated on March 2, South Korea's Public Pension Fund owns 10.88% of POSCO. The Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, the central bank of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that issues national currency, owns 2.38% of POSCO. The financial news website for traders provided the same information on its most recent company profile. This Trump International Hotel and Tower Lido project is the latest example of a slew of potential conflicts of interest Trump faces as he serves as president while continuing to own his vast real estate empire. McClatchy reported in September that a major construction company owned by the Chinese government was awarded a $32 million contract to build a 6-lane road as part of the residential piece of the Trump World Golf Club Dubai project. So he's collecting here from the governments of China, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia so far. This after the Trump Organization agreed, allegedly, and that's a link. Where do they even discuss it? It's a document cloud, I don't know what, some garbage that they put forth. Anyway, this all after the Trump Organization agreed not to engage in any new foreign deals or new transactions with a foreign entity. That would be country, agency, official, sovereign, wealth fund, or member of a royal family. Thanks for throwing that one in there. Other than, quote, normal and customary arrangements, unquote, made before his inauguration. It withdrew from some projects, including those in Argentina, Georgia, and India, less profitable, but kept others, including those in Canada, the United Arab Emirates, and Uruguay. There's a tweet embedded here, but it appears to have been written in whatever foreign language. I couldn't tell you what this foreign language is. I could read it to you, but does that make any sense? It's just funny that they embedded it. What are we supposed to make of it? I don't know. Donald Trump, Adala partner, Saya di Proyek Lido. Is this like, says partner of the Project Lido? Bogor dan Bali Nirwana Resort. So do you feel informed? Probably if you're listening in Indonesia, you do. Although you think my accent is horrible. Trump ignored calls to fully separate from his business interests when he was sworn in as president, instead placing his holdings in a trust designed to hold assets for his exclusive benefit, which he can receive at any time. Of course, he also retains the authority to revoke the trust. Walter Schaub, whose name is everywhere these days, who served as director of the Office of Government Ethics until July, said it was a foregone conclusion that Trump would have numerous conflicts of interest after he made the decision to retain his business. Just about every decision he makes puts him under a cloud of suspicion, Schaub said. It became inevitable because he didn't sell. It's precisely why he should have divested. Now, every time his company does business in a foreign country or with a foreign entity, Trump faces a fresh set of questions. Except no one's bothering to actually ask them. McClatchy does, but the rest of us are focused on, I don't know, P-tapes. Well, can you blame us, really? Anyway, every time he does a new deal with a foreign country or foreign entity, he faces a fresh set of questions. Is a foreign government gaining access to him because of his business? Yes. Is the business deal a factor in U.S. foreign policy? Yes. Is foreign government building goodwill with him? Is a foreign government building goodwill with him because of his company? Sure. The U.S. Constitution says officials may not accept money, titles, or gifts from foreign governments, and that no benefit should be derived by holding office. Ethics experts, including those involved in 3 separate lawsuits accusing Trump of violating the so-called emoluments clause, or it's now a so-called clause, I guess, of the Constitution, say that the latest agreements with POSCO could violate the law depending on what kind of influence the foreign governments have on the company and whether the Trump organization is receiving a benefit. Richard Painter, who served as White House ethics lawyer under President George W. Bush, said even if the POSCO deal is not covered by the Constitution, it is very problematic for the president because it raises questions about whether Trump is acting on behalf of his company or the presidency when he makes decisions. Budi Rustanto, Vice President Director of MNC Land, said in an email that his company focuses on businesses' credentials and proven performance track of record to build. Wow. When selecting a contractor, and that no third party should interfere in the selection process. He also stressed that the agreement between MNC and POSCO officials is at still a memorandum of understanding stage and is subject to the fulfillment of certain terms and conditions. The MOU signing is basically an intention to cooperate in the preparation to construct the Trump Hotel and other development components in Lido, he wrote. An official with the Trump Organization, run by the president's adult sons, declined to speak on the record. Wow, POSCO and the governments of Saudi Arabia and South Korea did not respond to questions. Last December, Trump downplayed potential conflicts of interest with his business. It's not a big deal. You people are making it a big deal. The business, he told reporters at his Florida resort, Mar-a-Lago. They all knew I had big business all over the place. That's some articulate Timothy. They all knew I had big business all over the big place. In this case, like many others that the Trump Organization is involved with, the company does not own the development, but rather licenses its name and manages the resort. The Trump Organization earned between $1 million and $5 million from Lido City in 2016 and the early months of 2017, according to financial disclosure statements. The Trump Organization announced its partnership with MNC on the Lido City development in 2015, so they probably consider it a pre-existing deal, and that must be why it's going forward. Except that he also will eventually just run out of such deals and just cheat and say, what are you going to do about it? Construction, it says, had barely begun when he was elected in November of 2016. Other foreign entities had signed on to the development before Trump became president. Korea Land and Housing was hired to develop a township near the resort. The China Metallurgical Corporation Group, I love the way they name things. It's very straightforward. Was selected to prepare a design for the project. Chinese Export and Credit Insurance Corporation agreed to provide some of the financing. Yawn. The 1,730-acre development to be set within the tropical forests of the mountains of the province of West Java will include a theme park, ride Donald Trump's hair through hell, I guess, hotel, villas, condos, country club, and spa, 18-hole golf course designed by South African golf great Ernie Els, set within the lush tropical forests of the mountains of West Java. And is that ecologically sound, by the way? I don't know. Approximately 65 kilometers south of Jakarta, the ultra-luxury resort will offer residents a luxurious retreat within a short distance, yet a world away from the hustle and bustle of the city, the Trump Organization boasts on its website. Here's the MNC group president in a photo here. By the way, backed by maybe a statue, a sculpture of an American bald eagle. Very nice for us. I don't know if they have bald eagles in Indonesia or not, but if they don't, they should import some. We'll give them some as a gift. The one that bit Trump, they can have. Let's see. MNC's billionaire president, Harry, I guess, H-A-R-Y. I don't know if he goes by, like, do they call him Harry, like in America? Oh my goodness. Are you kidding? Can I even try this? Tanosodibjo, maybe his last name. He's the MNC billionaire president. He's been called the Donald Trump of Indonesia. Everyone wants to be the Donald Trump of someplace, I guess. We don't, but they do. He unsuccessfully, by the way, he really is the Donald Trump of Indonesia. He unsuccessfully ran for vice president in 2014, but founded a new political party in the hopes of possibly running for president. Wouldn't that be perfect? He and his wife attended Trump's inauguration, where they were given special access to the festivities. We share the same background as businessmen, Harry said. They call him that instead of his last name, interestingly enough. Said in an interview in February with Tempo.com, we click and we can come to an agreement fast. He is the type of person to make quick decisions. And if you're like him, you're pretty dumb. So good luck, MNC and Indonesia. Best of luck with that one. Okay, back to Saudi Arabia just for a moment, even though I have a very large backgrounder to absorb. Maybe read on the air if it's worth everybody's time. I kind of have to absorb it off the air first on Saudi Arabia, some regional and global linkages that are always very interesting for those of us considering the strange status of Saudi Arabia. But here we have a hard news story that involves Saudi Arabia, and I probably should have just brought it up earlier rather than transitioning over to Indonesia and coming back. But this is troubling just in terms of like, oh, really? Because I thought a completely different thing happened than really did. And you'll know what I'm talking about when I get to reading you the piece in the New York Times from Max Fisher, Eric Schmidt, Audrey Carlson, and Malachi Brown. Ready for this one? Did American missile defense fail in Saudi Arabia? American missile defense. Yeah, I know we left some behind after like Operation Desert Storm and I guess probably Gulf War II as well. And of course, during the early trip to Saudi Arabia, of course, much touted deal in which Jared Kushner claimed to have sold them on $1 bazillion missile defense system, which may or may not already be there or may or may not really have been actually sold to them, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a story about a specific news event we noted in probably early November, and it turns out, well, maybe it didn't happen. Maybe it's fake news. The official story was clear. The article begins, Saudi forces shot down a ballistic missile fired by Yemen's Houthi rebel group last month at Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh. Remember, they shot a missile at the airport, and it was reportedly shot down. That was a big deal for us on the show that day, even though, of course, it was overshadowed by some other crazy nonsense from Trump, though I can't put my finger on exactly what it was that day. But I definitely remember this story. It was a victory of sorts, I guess, for the Saudis and for the United States, which supplied the Patriot missile defense system. That's the old stuff from the first Gulf War. Remember that? Our system knocked the missile out of the air. Oh, I should say, our system knocked the missile out of the air, President Trump said the next day from Air Force One en route to Japan, one of the 14 countries that use the system. I didn't realize that, but okay. That's how good we are. Nobody makes what we make. And now we're selling it all over the world, said Donald Trump. But an analysis of photos and videos of the strike posted to social media suggests that story may be wrong. Not that we're not the best in the world and selling it all over the place and things that go boom and explode and make kaplooies are, that part appears to be true. But instead, evidence analyzed by a research team of missile experts appears to show the missile's warhead flew unimpeded over Saudi defenses and nearly hit its target, Riyadh's airport. The warhead detonated so close to the domestic terminal that customers jumped out of their seats. There's a very interesting and detailed looking map here, though it doesn't tell me the story all by itself. But I guess, well, we'll read on and see if the map makes any more sense to us later on. Saudi officials did not respond to a request for comment. Some U.S. officials cast doubt on whether the Saudis hit any part of the incoming missile, saying there was no evidence that it had. Instead, they said the incoming missile body and warhead may have come apart because of its sheer speed and force. Now, I guess this is the sort of missile that ordinarily stays attached as between missile body and warhead, unlike, say, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are designed to separate from the warheads and just have their own independent reentry vehicles. These aren't missiles that reach the outer reaches of the atmosphere or space. This is, I guess, air-breathing missiles, as they call them. The findings show that the Iranian-backed Houthis, who I'm hopefully pronouncing correctly, once a ragtag group of rebels, that makes it sound like you're making a Bad News Bears movie about them, but okay, have grown powerful enough to strike major targets in Saudi Arabia, possibly shifting the balance of their years-long war, which we've shamefully neglected in this country and on this show as well. And I'm constantly reminded of it every time people are tweeting around pictures of the horrific results of the war in Yemen, that it's just it's so far outside of our purview, but we keep inching back towards it. One of these days, we're really going to have to give it some fuller consideration. It's not the sort of thing that political activism in the United States is likely to affect at this point in time, but it always pays to be up to date on horrible things that are happening, even in remote corners of the globe. Anyway, that acknowledgement having been made, let's return to this story. So, okay, this may, the possession, I guess, by the Houthi rebels of missile technology, even if it was just directly provided to them by Iran, changes possibly the balance of power in this long war. And they underscore long-standing doubts about missile defense technology, a centerpiece of American and allied national defense strategies, particularly against Iran and North Korea. Definitely true. Governments lie about the effectiveness of these systems, or they're misinformed, said Jeffrey Lewis, an analyst who led the research team which shared its findings with the New York Times, and that should worry the hell out of us. Are you ready to have the hell worried out of you? Here's the deal. The missile. It was a Scud missile. That makes a certain amount of sense. Shooting down Scud missiles is difficult, and governments have wrongly claimed success against them in the past. Here's a little map that shows a diagram of the estimated launch location from in Yemen, and the target being Riyadh, 610-mile range on this particular launch. The missile, seen in this video released by the Houthis and embedded below, is believed to be, a Burkan 2, B-U-R-Q-A-N, Burkan 2, a variant of the Scud missiles used throughout the Middle East. It traveled about 600 miles. Saudi and American officials have accused Iran of supplying the Houthis with the missile, a charge Tehran denies. A recent United Nations report found evidence that the missile had been designed and manufactured by Iran, according to a Security Council diplomat. Reuters first reported the UN findings. Mr. Lewis and other analysts, based mostly at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California, were skeptical when they heard Saudi Arabia's claim to have shot it down. Governments have overstated the effectiveness of missile defenses in the past, including against Scuds. We weren't particularly good against Scuds, even in the Gulf War debut of the Patriot missile system. But anyway, during the first Gulf War, here we go, the United States claimed a near-perfect record in shooting down Iraqi variants of the Scud. Subsequent analyses found that nearly all the interceptions had failed. I don't think I realized that. Had it failed in Riyadh as well? The researchers scraped social media for anything posted in that area and time frame, looking for clues. And here they were, in the debris. The pattern of missile debris littering Riyadh suggests missile defenses either hit the harmless rear section of the missile or missed it entirely. Just as I guess if you can't tell quite what it was, I don't know how good the analysis is going to be, but, well, interesting anyway. Just as the Saudis fired off missile defenses, debris began to fall down in downtown Riyadh. Video posted on social media captured one particularly large section, which landed in a parking lot next to the Ibn Khaldun school. Other videos show scraps that fell at a handful of other locations clustered in a roughly 500-yard area along a highway. Saudi officials said the debris, which appears to belong to a downed Burkan 2, showed a successful shoot-down, but an analysis of the debris showed that the warhead components, the part of the missile that carries the explosives, were missing. The missing warhead signaled something important to the analysts, that the missile may have evaded Saudi defenses. The missile, in order to survive the stresses of a roughly 600-mile flight, was almost certainly designed to separate into two pieces once near its target. The tube, which propels the missile for most of its trajectory, falls away. Like most rockets, you understand that. The warhead, smaller and harder to hit, continues toward the target. This would explain why the debris in Riyadh only appears to consist of the rear tube, and it suggests that the Saudis may have missed the missile, or hit only the tube after it had separated and begun to fall uselessly toward Earth. Some U.S. officials said there was no evidence the Saudis had hit the missile. Instead, the debris may have broken up under the pressures of flight. What the Saudis presented as evidence of their successful interception may have simply been the missile ejecting its tube as intended. I guess the next question is, what happened to the Patriot missiles that got fired at it? Where did they go? A blast 12 miles away at Riyadh's airport suggests the warhead continued unimpeded toward its target. It just missed by a hair, I guess. At around 9 p.m., about the same time debris crashed in Riyadh, a loud bang shook the domestic terminal at Riyadh's King Khalid International Airport. There was an explosion at the airport, a man said in a video taken moments after the bang. And you can imagine that being uploaded very quickly on social media, right? He and others rushed to the windows as emergency vehicles streamed onto the runway. Another video taken from the tarmac shows the emergency vehicles at the end of the runway. Just beyond them is a plume of smoke, confirming the blast and indicating a likely point of impact. A Houthi spokesman said the missile had targeted the airport. There's another reason the analysts think the warhead flew past missile defenses. They located the Patriot batteries that fired the missile, shown in this video embedded herein, and found that the warhead traveled well over the top of them. Saudi officials have said that some debris from the intercepted missile landed in the airport, but it is difficult to imagine how one errant piece could fly 12 miles beyond the rest of the debris, or why it would detonate on impact, that is, if it wasn't the warhead doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The impact here, smoke and ground damage, suggests the warhead struck near the airport's domestic terminal. Imagery of the emergency response and a plume of smoke also reveal information about the nature of the impact. A photo of the plume taken from a different location on the tarmac appears consistent with plumes produced by similar missiles, suggesting the explosion was not an errant piece of debris or an unrelated incident. By identifying buildings in the photo and video, Mr. Lewis's team was able to locate the spots from which the images were taken, revealing the precise location of the plume, a few hundred yards off of runway 33R and about a kilometer from the crowded domestic terminal. The blast was small, and satellite imagery of the airport taken immediately before and after the blast is not detailed enough to capture the crater from the impact, analysts said, but it does show ground damage from the emergency vehicles, supporting the finding that the warhead hit just off the runway. While the Houthis missed their target, Mr. Lewis said, They got close enough to show that their missiles can reach it and can evade Saudi defenses. A kilometer is a pretty normal miss rate for a Scud, he said. Even the Houthis may not have realized their success, Mr. Lewis said. Unless they had intelligence sources at the airport, they would have little reason to doubt official reports. The Houthis got very close to creaming that airport, he said. Wow, that's an odd way of putting it, rather casual, I think. Laura Grego, a missile expert at the Union of Concerned Scientists, expressed alarm that Saudi defense batteries had fired 5 times at the incoming missile. You shoot 5 times at this missile and they all miss? That's shocking, she said. That's shocking because this system is supposed to work. And it's supposed to be protecting us as well as also protecting the South Koreans and I guess the Japanese as well. And wasn't part of the trip to Japan part of the various and numerous faux pas? How would you say it? That Trump committed during the trip. Didn't he at some point, well, maybe prior to the trip, it was, I think, during the campaign that he excoriated the Japanese for not shooting down North Korean missiles that were flying over their territory, but I guess on the way towards the United States. Then when he got, I think, if I recall correctly, the story was that then he got to Japan and he had no interest in confronting anybody about all of his heated rhetoric during the campaign. I think I remember it that way. Don't know whether that's correct or true, but I guess if he's been after the Japanese to shoot down Korean missiles during their test launches, if he reads the news and believes it and has a head on his shoulders, and I guess that's a lot of big ifs, maybe he ceases doing such things because, well, it turns out that the missile batteries, the Patriot defense missiles don't appear to work all that well after all, and it would just show that up for the rest of the world to see. It might be the best thing, both for the Japanese and for us, not to bother trying to knock those things out of the air from Japan anyway. So maybe that's it. Maybe the stuff just doesn't work all that well. And that's long been the rumor and long been the concern when it comes to ballistic missile defense, whether it's the old Star Wars space-based defenses or these ground-based Patriot missile defense things. It's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, though there's, wonderful technology out there for blowing stuff up. No doubt about that. But how amazing would it be to find out after all this time that the legend that is the Patriot missile battery, the legend of Gulf War I and II, I guess, it really just didn't work at all. And I wonder whether the Saudis would go forward with the possibly entirely bogus deal that Jared Kushner allegedly struck when he was there. And maybe that's what he was doing there in his latest secret trip to Saudi Arabia, either letting him off the hook or insisting that, you can't not buy these things now or everyone will know that our missile defenses don't work, and that's a pretty crappy position to be in. And I admit, that would be a bad spot to be in for the United States, but, it's not my fault. I read the article. Maybe I shouldn't have. All the secret spy agencies out there are listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show for all their intelligence about American missile defense. But can't help you. It's in the New York Times. No stopping it now. Anyway, speaking of no stopping the news, what's up next on Netroots Radio? Well, you know what comes up by now. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is ready to roll once again today. What do we got on tap for you? Wow, do I have the latest one? Yes, here it is. Ready? Starting off in the front cafe, he's got, Justice does, an amuse-bouche, I shouldn't start with the French stuff, of ethics expert Richard Painter, back in our stories again today, telling Ari Melber that Paul Manafort needs to, quote, go back to the slammer. Then, on the rest of the menu, we'll explore how the large number of fake comments submitted to the FCC has caused New York Attorney General to urge the commission to delay the vote rolling back net neutrality.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
with David Waldman.
This made a big splash on Twitter yesterday. The founder and CEO of outdoor gear maker Patagonia is suing Trump over his evil land grab of Bears Ears National Monument. And another Trump company signs another deal with another foreign developer and breaks another Trump promise. Maybe we already covered that one, but don't worry. They've got all sorts of great material for you next on the West Coast Cookbook.